A very good morning to all the participants. On behalf of CII-ITC Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development, I welcome you all to the very first webinar of Business for Human Rights Initiative. My name is Japjeet Kaur Kharod, and I work with the center as an executive officer. I take this opportunity to brief you all about this initiative. Business for Human Rights Initiative is a business-led initiative which was launched on last Human Rights Day, that is 10 December 2016. On that day, CII committed to the UN to take action on human rights. The initiative is an action group of business stakeholders interested in improving human rights record. Members of the initiative make a public commitment to human rights, conduct risk-based due diligence, set processes to improve record, and improve disclosures on human rights. For any more information, please get in touch with me at the mentioned email ID. The members of this initiative are as shown on the slide, that is Wipro, Tata Steel, JCB, JSW, Tractors India Limited. I would also like to mention that as part of this initiative, we are also conducting an open house training program on business and human rights from 23rd to 24th November at Mumbai. It is a 2-day training program which will be quite detailed and in-depth. The program shall cover the following topics, that is, what are human rights, International Bill of Human Rights, United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, Human Rights Discourse in India, that is the National Voluntary Guidelines Principle 5 and UNGC Principle 1 and 2, which is also related to human rights, policy development and implementation, human rights due diligence, disclosures based on UNGB reporting framework and BRR, and also what are the business risks to companies and what are the legal implications, which human rights issues form part of the compliance and which are beyond compliance. So if you want to join this training, please, you can write to me anytime. So the topic of today's webinar is business, human rights, and the sustainable development goals. I would like to start with the definition of human rights. Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. They speak to a variety of ways in which people are entitled to be treated, that is, without discrimination, with the freedom to hold opinions and express their views, to enjoy privacy and a family life, decent working conditions, and a fair wage for their work, to be free from forced labor and physical abuse, to have access to clean water needed for drinking and hygiene, to food necessary to sustain themselves, and to highest level of health they can achieve, and so forth. Next is UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. These are set of guidelines that the states and the companies to prevent and address human rights abuses committed in business operations. The principles were developed to put into operation the Protect, Respect, and Remedy framework presented by the Special Representative to the United Nations. The principles were endorsed by the UN Human Rights Council in June 2011, and ever since, companies worldwide are working towards implementing them in their operations and value chains. The UN Guiding Principles state that the states have a duty to protect human rights, including abuse by business, and businesses have a responsibility to respect human rights throughout their activities and business relations, such as vendors, suppliers, contractors. Lastly, the victims of business-related human rights impacts must have access to remedy, whether judicial or non-judicial, governmental, or through company-designed grievance redressal mechanisms. So the Agenda 2030 calls on all businesses to apply their creativity and innovation to solving sustainable development challenges, and for states to foster a dynamic and well-functioning business sector, while protecting the labor rights and environmental and health standards in accordance with relevant international standards and agreements, and other ongoing initiatives such as UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. The guiding principles articulate how businesses are expected to contribute to the people part of the SDGs, namely placing respect for human rights at the center of their activities and business relationships. Both social development and social impacts are all about people. And it is not just people in any regard, but first and foremost about the most fundamental needs of people, the needs, the rights without which their ability to enjoy the fruits of development is best reduced and at worst entirely cut off. So, respect for people's human rights is not just part of social development agenda, it is an essential bedrock. Therefore, it is very important to embed, protect, respect, and remedy principles in the SDGs implementation. A development path in which human rights are not respected and protected cannot be sustainable and would render the notion of sustainable development meaningless. The Agenda 2030 of Sustainable Development is explicitly grounded in the UN Charter, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, international human rights and labor treaties, and other instruments, stating that the aim of SDGs is to realize the human rights of all. The Agenda 2030 also emphasizes that the business sector is a key partner for United Nations and the governments in achieving the SDGs. Next is the linkage between the SDGs and the human rights. If you look at any of the SDGs, it can actually be linked to human rights in some way or the other. For example, Goal 14, that is life below water, can also be linked to human rights. If the marine life is affected due to discharges from nearby industries, the fishes in the water body will die. The fishermen whose livelihoods are dependent on the fishing will also be affected, and hence their right to have adequate standard of living will be impacted. The SDGs themselves and their targets also cover a wide range of issues that mirror international human rights and labor standards. Many of the SDGs relate closely to economic, social, and cultural rights, including rights focused on health, education, food, shelter, alongside the rights to specific groups such as women, children, and indigenous people. SDG 16 on the need for peaceful, just, and inclusive societies emphasizes key civil and political rights, including personal security, access to justice, and fundamental freedoms. So the key question is, how can business contribute the most to SDGs? There is no more pressing or more powerful way for business to accelerate social development than by driving respect for human rights across their supply chains. Global trade and supply chains have contributed positively to economic development by helping people realize a range of economic and social rights. But supply chains are also linked to negative human rights impacts. Businesses that are part of global supply chain also can virtually affect all internationally recognized human rights. The risk of human rights abuse is often exacerbated by the way global supply chains are structured and managed, or not managed actually. By placing respect for human rights at the center of supply chain activities, business can make a huge contribution to sustainable development. Implementing the UN guiding principles in global supply chains will uplift millions of people out of poverty and abuse and enable them to enjoy the benefits of development. If you look at SDG 3, that is, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages, it can be linked to the following human rights, that is, right to life, right to health, special protection for mothers and children. Similarly, SDG 6, which is to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. It can also be linked to the following human rights, which is right to safe drinking water and sanitation, right to health, equal access to water and sanitation, right to an adequate standard of living. Similarly, SDG 8, that is, promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. It can also be linked to the following human rights: right to work and to just and favorable conditions of work, prohibition of slavery, forced labor, and trafficking of persons, equal rights of women in relation to employment, prohibition of child labor, equal labor rights of migrant workers. So as I said, all SDGs can actually be linked to multiple human rights. To conclude, I would like to say that companies should start using rights-based approach in their operations and value chains. Companies may use rights approach in deciding initiatives to contribute to SDGs. Start looking environment, health, safety, labor practices, and other sustainability issues from rights perspective as well. Community development and CSR needs studies may also be conducted with rights-based approach. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening to my thoughts on business, human rights, and the Sustainable Development Goals. We will now listen to Brigadier William, CSR head at Jindal Stainless, about his work on human rights. If you have...
I just wanted to repeat again that I think Jagjeet and Sachin, you all have put this webinar together at a very important time when businesses have got to get engaged with business and human rights issues. And we've got to really start working on the United Nations guiding principles in a very major way, because I would like to share the fact that, we've been working on this on business and human rights for a couple of years, and it did take off, which I will touch upon very briefly. The why of the agenda obviously is that business and human rights go hand in hand. It's a business case to respect human rights. And as Jagjeet rightly pointed out, that all the SDGs that have been listed have a direct linkage to human rights. Most importantly, SDG 17, which talks about partnership. So this webinar is essentially about partnership, how we can together work on this issue and see how best we can make a difference in the communities and also in our own businesses. So very quickly, I'll tell upon the journey piece, that the policy that has been framed, and we were part of the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations Guiding Global Compact, and to sensitize the corporations on the UNGPs. Now, on the 20th of June 2011, if you recall, there was this UNGPs that were released. At New York, and India was very much part of the Human Rights Council, which endorsed one of the first few signatories. The 48 countries signed up at that time, and we were the first few to sign up, and became a member of the council also. And the NVGs were released just 2 weeks later, on 8 July 2011. I remember we were there at a presentation, and Mr. Arpian Singh was, I think, one of the members who had, the minister at that time, who released this UN guiding, this NVGs. And principle number 5 talks very loudly about human rights. So then we thought it was an important thing that we need to propagate this, and therefore the CEO Forum on Business and Human Rights was farmed out, and on 13 February 2012 we launched it, with a number of corporates actually joining hands and launching this with Mr. Nayanamurthy as the chair, and I was the convener of this process. So we did a lot of work around it, and we did it across locations. We did a lot of awareness programs and trainings at our company office at Delhi, at Bangalore, at Infosys, Sun Unilever, and like that. At a later stage, sensitize the CII well, not the SDG, not the team of Sachin, who was taken up in a very major way, but the CSR Council, the members of the CSR Council, the CII, and we did a presentation. We also talked to FICCI and some other industry bodies to talk in this language that, we get other partnerships. And finally, the NHRC and CII joined hands, and last year we had, last year onwards, we did actually have a joint seminar on business and human rights, and now this is taken on a further step. So I think it's important to understand the three pillars which Jagjeet spoke about. The first pillar was of the protect, respect, remedy being the second and third. Obviously the first pillar is the responsibility of the state. And how did this come about? Some of us who are listening in may be aware, but some of you may not be aware, that John Draghi, he came to India when he was touring all over as a special rapporteur of the United Nations Secretary General, and when he came to India, he had a discussion and realized that the problems of India are quite different to the problems of the West, which were definitely, way out as what we are facing over here. Southeast Asia and the Asia-Pacific region have got typical formats, and especially I'd like to touch upon one of the issues of the rights of migrant population. And when we talk about migrant population for Malaysia or for Indonesia, and you have the shift of Australia in the Asia-Pacific region or Asia-Pacific region, when we talk about these migrants being kept at sea for 6 months, 8 months, not allowed to enter. Now that's a migrant population from Bangladesh, from Malaysia, from Myanmar, or from other countries of the South Asia region, kept away for months together. And this became a major issue. Now in our context, in India's context, when we talk about migration, we also must understand that migration also means from one state to another. So all these issues were quite different to what the US and the Western world were reasonably familiar with. So I thought I'd just mention this, that this meeting which took place in 2009, and it was one of the important, I think, engagements with stakeholders across the world. And in 2010, we had another meeting as part of the GBI, the Global Business Initiative on Human Rights, which we were members of, and it's 18-member group, 18 members from across the world. From India, Jindal Stainless was the only member, and we participated for good 4 or 5 years discussing human rights in different geographies of the world. So in 2010, November and it was first week of December, just before the coup, that we were assembled in Cairo, and John Draghi was there. And we had a very interesting discussion with various stakeholders, not realizing that 10 days later, the coup would be in Cairo, in Egypt. So the sense was there, it was the different feeling. So that's when realization was that we need to do a lot of work across the world. So when you see the MDGs, that's with us, and the UN Guiding Principles, the second pillar, which is of respect from 11 to 24, really concerns corporations. And for 11 to 15 is with foundation principles, and 16 to 25 are the operational principles. And all these principles, if you actually Google and have a look at them, and you must have it on your mobile telephones actually, the UN Guiding Principles, lock it up. I've been having it for many years. I keep browsing and I realize what Sachin and Jagjeet are talking about, the SDGs. Every SDG has got a direct linkage with human rights. How we covered in our areas, I would like to share that a little later. But see the flash, and I don't want to repeat all this, but essentially there was a core advisory group for the CEO Forum, a consultation process. The formal launch was in Delhi, training programs, and due diligence. So due diligence, if you see, is principle number 17 of the UN Guiding Principles. there were two companies who had volunteered to do the due diligence in 8 indicators. Of the 8 indicators, the most challenging indicator is on communities and environment. Especially with large corporations, with manufacturing sector, with extractive industries, those challenges are faced with communities, and you are aware of the recent happenings of POSCO. Having ventured out and coming to India with the largest FDI, they were planning 51,000 crores of investment. For 15 years they tried to acquire land, and I'm informed that last year they moved out. Why? Only because of community rights were being sort of affected and impacted. Initially, they were impacted most negatively, and when they tried to, do some remedy process in place, probably didn't work, and they exited. Now, those are the challenges. So land acquisition is one of the major areas, which I'll touch upon very briefly. So I am just trying to say that due diligence on community and environment are challenging procedures. So I would be happy to share with you that there was Mahindra Sanyo. They did a due diligence process on human rights, and Jindal Stainless Limited did on communities and environment piece especially. So that was something which I thought fulfilled this principle number 17 of the UN Guiding Principles, and that's exactly what many corporations need to do. It's good for you. It's good for the company. It's a business case how you can improve your various processes, and whether it's to do with security, whether it's to do with your engagement with your immediate community or the larger community or your markets, it's all important pieces. So these are some of the flash that Nanamurthy and Chris Gopalakrishnan were there for this launch, and there was an interaction. Here, Mr. Myra, you'll find that we were listening and talking about the India CEO Forum, and you find there are a large number of, out of the maybe 35 who had gathered, or maybe 45, at least 30 CEOs were present to sign up this document. But unfortunately, there are agendas, there are differences, and there has to be a continuous momentum. For 2 years, we really worked hard, and now in bits and pieces, we are continuing. You find Mr. Luke Wilde from 2050 from London. He came down for capacity building or training workshops. This at Infosys we did, and just on the first, that's 5 days earlier, he was here in Jindal's, and we had another little training program. So I'm saying we're doing it independently. And Biz for HR is a platform, a common platform is required, and we need to really take this forward by holding such kind of training programs. And 23rd, 24th W pensions is something which is happening in Mumbai. Will be very good for those of you who are not really familiar with this document of UN Guiding Principles, who are not familiar as to what are human rights. The biggest challenge is what are human rights. It means different to different people. And then finally, we understand that, yes, how we can embed this in our own corporates and make it as a business case. So some of the international perspectives, the Annual Forum on Business and Human Rights is held every year now. I had spoken at Geneva on one of these sessions of Annual Business. I had 3 sessions actually to take on. Well, the speaker, it was a great experience. There are almost 2,000 people now who are coming on annually. This year it will be held later part of this month at Geneva. It's held at Geneva every year. Then we have the Global Business Initiative on Business Human Rights, a great organization. Mark Hodge was their director. He's moved out now. But he's championed this in India, and I thought it was done extremely well. Many got sensitized. We took it on, and we tried to champion it. And we had people like Coke, ITC, Hindustan Unilever, and many other corporations, ONGC, and there were other PSUs who came into this kind of a foray to try to take this agenda forward. The OECD guidelines came out there after the National Action Plan in India, unfortunately. At initial stages, there was no action plan created for the UN Guiding Principles. So there was no one who was responsible besides the NHRC The National Human Rights Commission also wasn't really taking on the UN guiding principles in a major way. The OECD countries also started talking differently, meaning differently. Now what happened was, even in the SDGs, we've created a framework by 2030, okay, reduce poverty or no poverty, no hunger and the works. But there is no truth that is given. There's no legal framework to ensure that the countries are following guidelines, templates, and making sure that you're achieving goals which are prescribed so that by 2030, all 17 SDGs are fulfilled. And as I mentioned earlier, and so did Churchill, that these SDGs have a direct linkage with human rights. So now they're coming up with a national action plan. And this week, the countries are meeting in Nepal, I think in Kathmandu, to discuss the SDGs and how the national action plan is relevant in today's context, driven by a legal framework, making sure the countries are achieving certain goals and ensuring the fact that you are going to come up with a target by 2030. Now that's one piece. The second piece was of the reporting framework. There was no really articulation about the reporting piece on human rights. Fine, you've got the GRI framework, which has got a number of indicators relating to human rights. But there was no structured format which you can report on human rights violations, human rights processes. Human rights have been sort of mitigated in communities or in your employees or with your environment piece or whatever piece that you're talking about. So now they are the United Nations along with Mazars. Mazars was the human rights due diligence organization. It started off, of course, based on France and Indonesia. It has now a chapter in India. In fact, now it is directly being controlled by Mazars India. Rajiv is there, he's a great guy. They are experts in this field of human rights. They've created, along with Shift is an organization from London, again from UK. So Caroline Rees actually and Rajiv from Mazars have come up with a framework called the RAFI framework, Reporting Action for Human Rights Piece. So that framework is going to be propagated in a big way, and I think it's going to be under discussion in this annual forum also, which is taking place later this month. And then we talk about women empowerment principle, leadership group, and our various other issues of migration, child labor, and land issues. So land acquisition, I'll quickly brush upon, is a critical component as far as rights things are concerned in India. For corporations which I'm talking about, the manufacturing corporations, for corporations which are also linked to extractive industries. So when you're talking about land, and not only that, I mean, you take what roads, what challenges you faced in coming up with this Mumbai corridor, or what challenges you faced whenever you are talking about in terms of acquiring land for housing. All that is nothing but land acquisition. So there is a guideline for a business case on a human rights approach. I'll just flash my slides. I won't talk much, and maybe we can take it offline because I know I'm running a little behind schedule, and probably we need to give a little time to you guys also to simulate and maybe throw some questions at us. We'll do our best to respond. But the community challenges remain that the land has enormous cultural and political significance. What we keep forgetting is that, excuse me, this is the land that I'm acquiring as per the norms of the government of India, or as per the RR policy, or as per so-and-so law. I'm supposed to be giving you an X amount per acre of land. And that's it. You take it, the government, I will give it to the government will negotiate, the police will come and evict you. That was the thing line up, okay, you have hands off, you are clear that you've paid up for whatever you're acquiring. But in today's context, and today's media, and today's advocacy groups, and today's rights organizations, do not accept just what is the compliance piece. You have to go beyond compliance. You have to understand the fact that today when you are acquiring land, when you are acquiring communities, livelihoods, you've got to think of the cultural and the political significance. But there are a lot of dynamics, and I'm sure most of you who are listening in understand these dynamics. The most important dynamics is petty politics at the local levels, where one group says, okay, I'll get the signatures, you don't worry. We hold a meeting, a Gram Panchayat comes on board, and signatures are just given to the guy because he has taken his share hugely from the corporation. We are all culpable for such kind of activities. We've got to understand that those are the challenges which we have to mitigate or find solutions for and mitigate this problem by respecting human rights. So similarly, there are other things which you can have a look at the slide, you've gone through it. There are business in most cases have no control over the actual things of the government that take place, and no relocation shall take place without free, prior and informed consent and after a fair compensation. This is the very important piece. Free, fair and prior informed consent. Do we do that? Do we actually have these meetings with the communities and not the community leaders before acquiring land? I've got many instances I would like to share. There are corporations, big corporations, who can wield the sword, get it. There are small corporations who can wield the sword and not get it. There are corporations which are fighting against each other when the allocation piece goes on. And there is that government, the state government, which has got its own agenda. Supposedly trying to resolve issues with the communities is good for development, it is good for their livelihood in the long term, but the immediate term, definitely it gets a challenge. This last week when I was driving to Jajpur, where Jindal Stainless, integrated stainless steel plant is there, I keep visiting, of course, and each time I see something new coming up. There is a village which is in an area of another corporation occupying that land. And as a CSR project, if some other company or our company was doing a project over there to help the communities, our own challenges remain that why are we doing a project in somebody else's area? Isn't it their responsibility? It may be anybody's responsibility. But I think it's important to understand that you respect communities, you in the long term have got lots to do with it. Whether you're taking the water from Brahmani, whether you're taking the electrical pipeline running from across, the water will go through those villages, will go through those areas. You have to respect the community's feelings and then take it from there onwards. So when you have a conversation with them, give them an opportunity to speak and you will get the things right. So here the due diligence piece, the articulating of companies' commitment to respect human rights is all aligned essentially to principle number 16 and 17 when you browse that the policy commitment should be there. Many of us have a policy commitment listed in other policy commitments of ours, like code of conduct, or code of ethics, and things of that sort. It's important to have your human rights policy and policy as it relates to you, and you keep tracking these various performance. So the three principles for land acquisition: transparency, non-discrimination, accountability, and essential guidelines for business in the process of land acquisition is conduct a baseline survey, assess conflict potential and impact, identify legal owners. That's the very difficult thing, is to identification of the legal owners themselves. So we need the government support, we need to understand these dynamics and then take it forward. Always remember that the heart and soul of any endeavor is the second pillar, the second P of the triple bottom line, people. The first P, in fact. People, planet, profit. all that you do is for the first P of the triple bottom line is people. Respect the cultural norms and ensure that it meets the standards which have been laid and accepted by the international community. It's not good enough to say that, okay, principle number 5 of the National Voluntary Guidelines have articulated 1 to 3. They may not include 6 and 7 of something which is listed in the UN Guiding Principles. So that is why I thought it's important to just touch upon land. And there's many other places, of course, everything else, whether it's education, whether it's to do with health, whether it's to do with environment or sustainable cities or whatever SDG we talk about has got a direct relevance. So I thought I will stop over here and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity of sharing some of my thoughts. My screen just went blank and I apologize for the faux pas which was created on the computer, thanks to technology, but I'm responsible for this because Jamjeet had mentioned we must have a little, a trial run, and there was no time. I could not have the trial run. So Jamjeet, apologies, and I hand it back to you. Thank you.
No worries, sir. Yeah. So I was looking at the questions. We have only 2 questions. Can you open it? Yeah. So one was related to the cost of the training that I mentioned. So the cost of the training is 14,500 per person for companies who are not members of Business for Human Rights Initiative, and it is 10,500 for companies who are members of this initiative. And if there are 3 or more members from same company, then you get a 10% discount. So that's about the cost. And the second question was related to what is the rights-based approach. That was related to my presentation. So rights-based approach, whenever companies are conducting impact studies within their company or outside, they should also consider how they impact the rights of people they interact with, such as the community, the employees, contract workers, indigenous people, etc., and accordingly take the initiatives to address those human rights. Even when environment impact studies are happening and you're looking how your company is impacting the environment, you should also conduct studies how the communities are affected and whether their human rights are impacted because of any environmental issues or any health safety issues. So the human rights aspect should also be considered whenever the impact studies are being conducted by companies. In CSR studies, need assessment, companies need to see if the community nearby their operations have access to all their human rights. The government is doing their best to protect the human rights of people, but companies can also help people in achieving the human rights. For example, if the children do not have a school, the companies can think of projects of making schools and address the children's right to education. So that's all from my side. We don't have any more questions. Anyone, please, if you have a question, now is the time to ask, please. So next question is, who conducts this study in India? So CII also helps companies in conducting the due diligence. So you can, Ashish Sharma, you mentioned this question, you can get in touch with me. We can discuss regarding your company and how CII can help you. Okay, so that's all the questions. Anyone else has a question?
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah, sure.
Yep, I just want to know from the 45 members who are listening, how many are familiar with the UN Guiding Principles? And how many have actually done some work in their own companies relating to business and human rights? Yep.
So everyone can type their responses in the question. Well, someone just asked that does human rights approach suppose companies' commitment even if there is no business case for human rights? Well, Mr. Jain, I would like to mention that human rights issues, in one way or the other, it can lead to a serious business risk for the company. So that is the business case to address the human rights of people in the organization. Any community issue or any employee issue can lead to even reputational risk and pose a reputational risk to the company, and that will have impact on your investment side also. So and also future investments
Yep.
will be affected. So that is why it is a business case for company to address the human rights.
Japjit, can I just respond also a
Sure,
little
sure,
bit
sure.
on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think it's very important the way that Javjit has articulated the response, but also you take a recent example, Rana Plaza, the 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, which took place in Bangladesh. I mean, it impacted so many of the garment industries in Europe. I mean, they were all literally almost shut down. You take Nike's case. I mean, they had such a huge disaster which took place as far as the branding was concerned. They had to do a lot of work. You take British Petroleum. You they disappeared. I think IBM is one of the largest ones. Tata's is one of them. So I'm just saying that many companies, and it's only because of the fact that you have not respected the rights of communities, because of short-term goals that you say, why invest? Or rather, why spend? They said, now it's why invest. If you don't invest, you will not be able to sustain your own operations for a long time. So I think that's very critical to understand that it's despite you may not understand it being a business case, but it virtually does become a business case. Thank you.
Mr. William, can you open the questions box? It will be on your right side.
Yep, I am. Actually, I'm having a problem here, but this thing rights. No, I can't hear any. I can't see any questions coming up on my screen.
So we just changed the settings.
So if you can, I'm trying to figure out, but I just can't get it. Now, my IT guy was here. I can call him again, but yep. Show screen. I'm sorry, I can't see any questions on my screen.
It's okay. So I'll read out the question. So next question we have is, in India, which companies have conducted studies and what are the major outcomes? So I would like to mention that I know Tata Steel has conducted the due diligence study, and also Wipro has conducted. And Mr. Jindal, in Jindal Stainless also, I guess you've conducted a study, Mr. William?
Jindal Stainless, and there's Mahindra Sanyo and Jindal Stainless Limited. We did it in 2014. Both these companies have done it. And I'm glad that Tata Steel has done it, and so has Wipro. Well, Wipro was in conversation, Infosys was in conversation, but I wasn't aware. But it's great news. So that's what learning and sharing is all about. This platform which you have created is nothing but learning and sharing. And this is what we get to know, and this is what we must do and try and build up through a common platform like the industry body like CII. Thank you.
So Saurabh is saying that we at Ambuja conduct site-specific impact assessment at all our plants. This impact assessment is to understand the potential impacts, including human rights and social, on community, nearby plants, and accordingly develop action plans to address these issues identified. So I guess he's just providing information. That's good to know, Saurabh, about Ambuja. And someone from Monsanto is saying that they are signatories to UN Global Compact and are running human rights program for past 10 years. Glad to know, Mr. Mahesh, and it will be nice if you can share what programs you are running in your company. because we will also be making case studies of Indian best practices and showcasing them at the UN forum next year, hopefully. So if we have any Indian best practices, please companies, you can share with us. Next question is from Mr. Suneet Malhotra. I visited a company recently that buys water from outside, about 10 tankers daily, and an auto company with European background. It's all groundwater that they are using and should easily use water from municipal connection. SDG 6 covers drinking water, but does anything cover or stops to use groundwater without contributing or putting back the water and increasing the water table? So that's their question, if anyone can stop them from doing that. Well, I guess the environment department, they must be submitting something to them, and ideally the government is supposed to take action if anything is beyond the legal norms. So
Yeah, I can add on a little bit to that piece, I thought. It's important to understand that large number of corporations are doing just that. It's the easiest way is to go deep down and extract water. And as you rightly said, if you can't recharge the water or you don't invest in projects which are on watershed management, then you are actually stealing away the resources, water or mining operations and pollution contributing to everything. So though you have pollution control officers and you've got this department looking after these norms, many a times the unfortunate piece is number 8 principle of anti-corruption of UN Global Compact, the issues we talk about, anti-corruption. Now, all this is after all those 4 issues of UN Global Compact with human rights and labor and environment and anti-corruption have to be addressed. And there's a government body, there is a private sector, and once we realize what is impacting communities, I'm sure if we get sensitized, we will be able to stop these practices, which are not the best practices to follow in such environments. Thank you.
thank you, sir. So the next question is, what type of measurement can be undertaken to monitor the human rights compliance performance of the company? Any suggestions from Jindal Stainless? This is from Saurabh. It is directed to Mr. Williams.
Yep.
What
Sort of nice question. See, I'll tell you a simple thing is carbon dioxide sequestration. Now that's again a mitigating problem. So one thing is very simplistically put, you put a lot of trees. Now trees is those trees which have got the capacity to absorb carbon dioxide from our plant sites. Makes good sense. So that's a mitigating problem, which we have done in a very big way. 2, water. Somebody talked about water. Now obviously you've got a reservoir from the river which comes in there, but recharging of the water by having water harvesting structures, by having a water action plan in place, reduces your requirement of water for your furnaces. So almost 23% of water consumption was reduced for the last almost 10 years. There's a UNFCCC project of creating an ambience of making sure that you are using your waste gases for your furnaces. That project is also taken on. So I know there are initial problems when you have a greenfield project, but over time, environment, as I mentioned to you, is a critical area, is a critical indicator of impacting human rights of people, like water, like carbon dioxide emissions, like things to do with solar. So we are using solar panels now on our plants, where you've reduced the problem. There's a huge requirement, of course, of carrying on with it, but these are some of the challenges. So what we've done, very briefly, I've touched upon these 2-3 areas, and we can, in due course of time, and we have more conversations with that, share many other areas, which I think can demonstrate and prove the fact that it is a business case of respecting human rights. Yep. Thank you.
So we have past our time, but still we can take a couple of questions. So someone has asked if business case for human rights is so obvious, why companies need a push for pursuing business and human rights? So my view is that so not all human rights are protected under the law, and even which are protected, the enforcement is not very strong as of now. So in certain companies, the enforcement is very strong. In certain, there it is not. But it is up to the company who want to be global. They need to match the global standards. Now, the recent UK Modern Slavery Act, if a company needs to have business over there, they need to comply with that act. Similarly, if the companies want to go in Europe and US, they need to comply with the laws. But it's up to the company whether they voluntarily want to start doing it now, or they only want to move things when there is a compliance issue. So that is my
Yep.
view. Anything? Yeah.
Yeah, can I add something here?
Yeah, yeah.
I agree with you, everything is not a business case. But business has never understood human rights the way it is being understood today. I mean, I'm telling you, just 4 years ago or 4.5 years ago, when we made the presentation in the CSR Council of CII, they said, can we tweak that word human rights? Because businesses are supposed to know everything about human rights. They're two sides of the same coin, business and human rights. They didn't see eye to eye. But when you understood the dynamics of respecting rights of people, you understand that it is very much in sync with each other. Business and human rights are sync with each other, not primarily from the business case, which apparently it is. But even if you do not see a business case in today's time and date, you will realize in due course of time when you take any product. I mean, you take the spill, oil spill which takes place. I mean, that's a simple thing, how you can ensure that you can avoid these kind of oil spillages. You take the areas of mining operations. I mean, earlier, all the mine casts that were done are just left like that. It's not an eyesore, but you've taken away a lot of resources from a particular geography and not done your reclamation of land. Reclamation is important. Yesterday, the business houses said, excuse me, that's not our responsibility. Whether it's to do with education, whether it's to do with Swachh Bharat, the works. I mean, we just said that this is our job, our profit margins have to increase, and that's our business. But when you realize that the markets in Europe suddenly close the orders because you have not done anything to do with child labor, or you've done it by just placing boards that there is no child labor in this factory, but the due diligence that is carried out by somebody realizes that there are issues which are navigating differently, which is resulting in huge losses to you. Another thing is, I'll tell you the example. I mean, when we didn't talk that language when we are acquiring land, and you say that when the plant is just about started off, you say that we will not bother about the communities. We've given them jobs. They are 18-year-old individual. When the land was acquired, a child of 18 years would get employment. But a child who was 5 years or 6 years at that stage, I'm not bothered about him. Fine. When he turns 18, he realizes that my livelihood is gone. Or when he was 16 or 16 and a half, and you didn't give him an employment when he became 18, those challenges are beyond compliance stages. So when you have a dharna or a lockout, one day lockout in a steel plant means millions of dollars gone. And that's the relationship between business and human rights. That's something going beyond compliances. And we will realize that when we talk about the Western markets especially, they ask you this question, what are you doing in this principle? Yep. Thank you.